In this video, we're just going to practice with 6 problems, setting up and solving proportions. You might want to try each one first and then come back and watch it being solved. Make sure you know what you're doing. So in number 1, if 14 bags of mulch cost $51.10, how much would 49 bags cost? So we're talking about bags over cost. I usually just do whatever I see first. So the first one is 14 bags cost $51.10. 49 bags, right, all the bags go on top, cost how much? Cross multiply, 14x equals 2503.90. Divide both sides by 14, and 49 bags should cost roughly $178.85. Makes sense? 49 bags is quite a bit more than 14, and $178 is quite a bit more than 51. Number 2. To determine the number of fish in a popular fishing lake, conservation officers catch and tag 200 fish, throwing them back in. Weeks later, they catch 82 fish, and they discover 8 are tagged. Use proportional reasoning to estimate the number of fish in the lake. So we're looking at tagged fish, and we're comparing that to the total. So when you look at this first number, they tagged 200 fish out of how many? Well, out of all the fish in the lake, and we don't know how many fish are in the lake. Then later they caught 82 fish total, and out of those 82, 8 were tagged. So we're keeping, that's kind of the proportion. So we cross multiply. 8x equals 16,400. We divide both sides by 8, and we would estimate that there are 2,050 fish in the lake, right? And that's an estimate. That's assuming that the proportion of tagged to caught is always 8 to 82. Number 3, if the homicide deaths in South Africa, which the actual is 16,259, were proportional to those in Australia, which the actual is 254, what would have been the expected number of homicide deaths in South Africa in 2012? So I give you the population here. This is from a table in an earlier section, but we're playing the what if game. So we're comparing South Africa to Australia, and we're talking about deaths, and the other thing that we can compare is population, because you've got to have 2 things to work with here. So let's go back, and what is the expected number of homicide deaths in South Africa? South Africa deaths. That's where the X goes. We're playing the what if game. Everything else we can fill in with what we know. I know the population in South Africa is 54 million. I know in Australia there were 254 deaths and the population was 23.5 million. Because both of my populations are in millions, I can leave the million off because it's consistent. All right, so then I go to cross multiply. So 23.5x equals, I go this way, 54 times 254 gives me 13,716. I divide both sides by 23.5. And if South Africa killed people at the same rate that Australia did, there would only have been 584, I rounded to the nearest, deaths in South Africa, where you can see the actual was over 16,000. So this would have been the estimated. So you can see that the estimate would have been quite a bit less than the actual if they had killed people at the same rate that Australia did. In number 4, let's talk about Japan and Mexico killing people. So Japan, Mexico, deaths to the people. So if Japan's homicide rate were proportional to that of Mexico, how many homicide deaths would Mexico expect to have? So now we're trying to find Mexican deaths. And you can see that it says, how does it compare to the actual, which we can talk about that anyway, but we need the actual data. So in Japan, there were 442 deaths, 127 million people. In Mexico, we're trying to figure out the what-if deaths compared to the 125.4 million. All right, so we cross multiply. 127x equals, we go the other direction, and we get 55,426.8. I divide both sides by 127, and I get this. Again, this is the estimate. The estimated number of deaths in Mexico would have been 436, I rounded to the closest 2. Look at the actual. The actual is just a shade over 26,000. So the estimate is less than 450 compared to the actual of over 26,000. That is a huge difference between the actual and the estimate if Japan had killed people at the same rate, if Mexico would have killed people at the same rate as Japan. So it's just a what-if game, right? So this is where you can say, geez, Mexico, why can't you be more like Japan? And we would, you'd kill less people, right? It's the whole be like your older sister type of a thing. All right, number 5. Let's go to school districts. We also did some problems for school districts. If the number of school districts in Kentucky, so again, we're playing the what-if game, were proportional to the number of school districts in Michigan, how many school districts would we expect to see in Kentucky? So we're comparing Kentucky to Michigan. School districts compared to people. Okay, now where does the X go? How many school districts would we expect to see in Kentucky? So there's my X. Everything else gets a value. In Kentucky, there are 4.4 million people. In Michigan, there are 9.9 million people. I'm getting that from here. And in Michigan, there are 550 school districts. So I play the cross multiply game. 9.9x equals, I multiply the other way, and I get 2,420. I divide both sides by 9.9, and we have approximately 244, I'm just going to round to the nearest 2, school districts in Kentucky. Well, you can see Kentucky only has 174 actual, right? This is the actual, this is the estimate. So if Kentucky was like Michigan, they would have to build 70 more school districts, not just school buildings, school districts to be like Michigan in terms of school districts per capita. Big difference. And number 6, let's do another one of those. Now we're comparing Indiana to Illinois in terms of school districts to people. Okay, so how many school districts will we expect to see in Indiana? So now we're saying if Indiana was like Illinois, how many should we have? So do we have enough? Do we need more? What's the difference? So Indiana has 6.5 million people. Illinois has 12.8 million people, and Illinois has 863 districts. So we're going to use that for our comparison. So I cross multiply. 12.8x equals, I multiply the other way, and I get 5,609.5. I divide both sides of my equal sign by 12.8, and if Indiana was like Illinois, it would have roughly 438 school districts. But you can see Indiana only has 297. So if we wanted to be like Illinois in terms of school districts per capita, we would have to add 141 school districts. That's a lot of school districts. And there's a lot of different reasons why I'm sure that is like it is. But with proportions, you can play the what if game.